been a year and a couple months since you joined the institution. So how are you feeling about that? What's that been like?
It's been a wild ride.
Yeah.
It's been incredible. I'm still very excited that I chose to work for Nelson Mandela University and to be based particularly at the George campus.
Yeah.
Every day is a new day, but you get to learn a lot of things. And it's been very refreshing to be at this campus of this size in this region.
And education is something that you hold quite passionate and close to you. Where does that come from? Has that always been the case? So even from the studying and the journey that you followed there, it seems that academia was always at the core of it and the importance of educating people. Is that the case, or?
Yes, I come from a family of educators.
Okay.
My grandfather was a school principal.
Okay.
My grandmother was
So
a teacher.
It's part of,
Their children were teachers and nurses, and over the years I've also interacted with a lot of people who were influenced by them. And so it just followed that if you were grown up in that family, you were influenced to love education, but to also want to impart education to others. So that's where it came from.
So that's where it came from. And UCT is where the formal higher education starts. You had attended UCT undergrad. Now, at the time, being young, of course, being black, being a woman, are still things that we in society today have to work through and battle with. But I can only imagine what those challenges must have been at that time, you know, and how was it navigating through that space, especially within education, within academia, but now being young, being black, and battling those issues?
It was very challenging, but also exhilarating. Let me put age into perspective. Young, I was 15 going for 16 when I started varsity. And so it was an incredibly daunting journey to leave home, to go so far. But I also went to boarding school, so that half of the distance of studying from far from home was covered by my 5-year experience in boarding school. Going to UCT was the furthest I'd ever gone at that time, and I really wanted to go far from home so I can experience the freedom, so the exhilaration came from that. I made a lot of friends, and I made a lot of friends from different countries and from different places and walks of life, and that in itself made my stay at UCT worth my while. Back in those days, transformation was picking up as a priority for the sector of higher education, and specific programs that were already put into place are programs such as Grow Your Own Timber by the UCT Vice Chancellor, Dr. Mampele. But also in that period were internship programs that were specifically targeting young black scholars and emerging administrators from the university. The affirmative action program was also at its infancy then, and we had an opportunity to also contribute to what that would look like. So I had a lot of opportunities within that time because I allowed myself to experience the newness of the university, but also to shape the policies from a student perspective on what matters
so critical.
in change. Yes.
And then the decision to then go overseas, was that via direct interest and like something that you wanted to do, or it was an opportunity that was provided and it just happened to land on your laps in that moment?
You know, Obi, I wish I could say it was something I thought about. I'd never thought about going overseas. I just happened to be interacting at a conference of student affairs, which was my passion, and the work that I did, I contributed a lot in student organizations at the time. And I was very much interested in how universities assist students from SADC countries to integrate and find their feet at the South African higher education institution. So in my work as well as my interaction with students and leading young students who were mentors at the time, I came across an opportunity that someone said, look, this one would suit you very well. You should apply for this scholarship.
And it's often that's how things,
I'm too busy to apply. And for some reason, that person pestered me for some time. Until I said, okay, I'm going to apply. So I went into it with that lousy, okay.
If it happens, it happens.
And it did happen. And so I had to have an opportunity to go and represent myself as well as the ideas that I had for how we can change our engagement with students. And I had an opportunity to compete with 25,000 South African students who were interested in the same opportunity at the time. And I wanted to study specifically policies that have to do with student engagement, student support, student services, student life and development. And so I got the scholarship. It was the Fulbright Scholarship. And it gave me a chance to study at any university anywhere in the world.
That you decided on or by choice, okay.
But it was particularly trying to encourage a relationship between South Africa and American states and American institutions of higher education. So I decided if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to that university that has the very best of the program in student affairs in the world. And so that's how I ended up there. When you go into a country that is not yours, you are far more enriched when you know who you are, where you come from, and what you stand for. My particular family background gave me a very strong sense of personal identity. I wasn't ambivalent about being an African. I wasn't ambivalent about being a smart young woman. I wasn't ambivalent about being the first one in my family to have to do this kind of thing in a continent that no one else in my family had done. So part of that perspective meant I was going to be a trailblazer. And I was going to have to find my way without relatives, without anyone to copy. And so I had the opportunity to do things that were different.
And to set the scene.
And to set the tone for myself and possibly for anyone else who could follow in those steps. But I was also taught to be humble and to pray a lot. And so all of that was very instrumental in my being able to live in a country that I'd never imagined I would live in, to survive so far from my mom and my dad and my siblings, but also to be so far away from home that you don't know which direction home is. And to also find a way of representing my family when I am so far from them and no one is watching.
Because that's what matters the most.
That's what matters the most. Are you carrying your name very well? Are you carrying your identity very well? When you leave, do people remember that you were there?
To shift that now back in the African continent at home, and I think even right now where we find ourselves within the context of COVID and as students within communities, it's been so difficult to form interactions. It's been difficult to engage with people the way we used to. And within an isolated space like George, that only compounds that difficulty. And I was noticing, I think there was a session that we had last year towards the end of the year with different student leaders and house comms, and those views were also expressed, this disconnection that seems to be experienced. And how do you feel in that context that we find ourselves now within George, we could still interact or still be able to have such a university experience where a student can come from wherever they come from, but then gain the insights and interactions within the context of COVID that we happen to find ourselves in?
I think so much has changed in the past 18 months for people of the world, but for students in general, for university workers, for researchers, for academics, for administrators and support services. We've always been able to see the world through each other's eyes and experience the world through contact. And what COVID has done is it has forced us to reimagine our humanity as going beyond the physical space and as needing a lot more reflection on the personal, on the group space, as well as a community. In the time that we've been isolated, where we have been living through different lockdown levels, we've been forced to introspect a lot more. And introspection is not something that people teach you. Not even at home are you taught to introspect. So it's been a scary period for most human beings, personally, for most students also. But it's also been a period of growth for some of us who are able to deal with being in your own space and being isolated. But not everyone is like that. For some others, it has been a very depressing time. It's been a time of deprivation of that social interaction. And it can turn your world upside down. So in this period, you find we have experienced a lot of deep mental health issues among students, among staff, among community members. Plus, we're dealing with the added uncertainty of not knowing when this pandemic is going to end. So we are having to dig far much deeper to be human. We dig deep into our hearts. We dig deep using technology platforms to reach out to others and to still remain in community without necessarily having to be too close or too physical. And that is the new world that we are facing. It is not the first time that the world has experienced a pandemic that has had us rethink what being human means. What we're not doing enough of, though, as scholars and as students who are activists, is deciding for ourselves what it means to be human under these circumstances of the pandemic. Deciding how we are going to reimagine our interaction under these circumstances. I think it's a rich time for young people to be creative. The creative space has always been, pandemic or sans pandemic, has always been one area where we can begin to force people to have dialogue about very difficult things in our lives. The creative arts, whether it is performing arts, whether it is debate, whether it is drama, whether it is singing, music, all of those activities are at the heart of being a social being. We are not thinking as innovatively, I think, as we could in this time with the limited restrictions of using those activities and those visual or performing arts as a mechanism to keep people in community. What stops students from using this room as a poetry night? What stops students from saying, we want to do exercise, we have a big sporting field, we are going to line up, we're going to put X's on the ground to mark our distance, and we're going to have someone lead aerobics at that distance? What stops us from doing that? You have the air that is needed for you to stay safe. You have the distance. If you agree how to move about from the sports field so that you still remain safe, you can enable yourself in that way. What stops students from saying, we are going to find a means with this environment that we're in on the campus to take hikes in smaller groups and enable social distancing whilst we do that? What stops us from saying we are going to picnic but enable social distancing?
I like that, yeah.
Nothing stops us.
Nothing stops us from getting those.
But we are so accustomed to, if it's a no, it means it's a no completely, and we cannot think creatively around it. And because we are all or nothing people, We really are struggling to find healthy means to enable our communities, even if it's our community of engagement on the campus. What stops students from saying the lecture room over there is going to be a means for us to have a debate on a Friday? The same thing that stops students from saying we are going to make this campus a vibrant environment to exist in after 4 o'clock, so that it's not a dead campus. Nothing stops us from doing that.
That's the innovation that's important.
Yes, and to be honest with you, Obi, when students are creative, a lot of good comes out of it. When students are really thinking about creating communities of practice, how to do something best even under these circumstances. And I know students are capable.
Indeed.
But we seem locked away in a space where we only say you can't, you can't, you can't. We are not suggesting, we are waiting.
And there's an anxiety around it.
There's an anxiety. There should be an anxiety about it, because
healthy,
these are dangerous times. There should be an anxiety about it. But we shouldn't be paralyzed at the same time. We shouldn't be paralyzed if we inform ourselves on what it means to stay healthy, what is required for us to observe the protocols. There must be something creative that we can do to still enable a vibrant social community on the campus. Students must create their own agency.
As opposed to asking for...
Yes, create your own impetus to do certain things and show us how it can be done. After all, you're going to be leaders when you finish here.
In the workplace.
You can't be hesitant leaders. You also can't be reckless leaders. So what needs to happen in order for students to say, we would like to pursue sports. Here are the suggestions that would make us safe. We want to use the gym. Here are the suggestions that can make us... What stops us from I mean, it starts with small things. It starts with everybody must wear a mask. And Obi is walking, and his peer is not wearing a mask, and Obi says, you need to wear a mask. You're not making me safe. When we cannot do small things like that on our campus, on any of our campuses, we will be hesitant to put a solution that enables a community of practice on our campus under these circumstances. We are a small enough campus to be able to do very dynamic things under these circumstances, but we do not hold ourselves personally and collectively responsible for observing the bare minimum of the COVID procedures. So I'm not surprised that we are hesitant. I'm not surprised that we turned inside out about things we cannot do.
And something that I want to know is, within the context of higher education, there's a lot going on a global conversation scene, but locally as well, with regards to issues like funding and the issues around getting access to institutions and whether institutions are allowing enough people of color to get in. What are your hopes or aspirations for what education could look like in the future, and making sure that people that need this education get access to it? What do you hope or aspire to we would see eventually?
I think the most important thing is for all of us to understand that if we want to progress in life, regardless of what our station is in life, we need to get that education. We need to be able to really invest in people, invest in the development of young people in particular. But we also need to understand that not everyone starts from the same station in life. Other people have a lot more challenges than others, and therefore need a lot more investment in time, in energy, as well as programs to get them ready. And we need to also recognize that we are living in a country that has inherited a lot of burdens. And some of these burdens are carried by the young people that we are calling students today. The burdens of raising families all by yourself as a student and a young person. The burdens of living with disease. The burden, and disease can be anything from stress to depression to HIV to high blood pressure or any chronic diseases. But then we are also living with a lot of strain that young people have taken because over time they have gone through incredibly difficult periods. We don't talk a lot about what it means when we change the curriculum at high school and what that does to students when we change the curriculum midway and then expect them to catch up and then go and still make it to university. And we live with a lot of pressure where we are forcing students to go to university that shouldn't be going to university. Not everyone should be coming to university. And there are other options for students to actually find their feet professionally as well as educationally that we don't talk a lot about. And we shortchange and create so much pressure for young people.
To gain this specific...
To gain this specific education, university as opposed to technical college, as opposed to a skills trade, and we create so much pressure that we leave a lot of young people very disillusioned with not getting the thing that we said was the premium thing, or the education.
And then we package the others as lesser than, or...
Right.
Exactly.
And we are not investing enough time in making sure that those students who are not necessarily going through university but are going through other platforms of the post-secondary sector are absorbed into the job market. So even where we have those who are brave enough to say university is not for me, I'm going to go to a TVET college, they still struggle to find jobs because we don't have a very strong articulation system that says if you have this qualification you can come over here, we'll employ you, and we will employ you with the same kind of dignity and respect as someone who went to university. So in the future, I would like to see that we actually create more opportunities for young people to enter the job market.
Ma'am, I have to say thank you so much. I appreciate this. It's been more than inspirational for me. And the last thing I want to know from you is slightly cliche, but I do think important. What would you say to people in this situation now, students specifically within our campus? You know, we've heard difficult stories. People are quite open on social media about what they're going through and have been. And what would be some light that they could be given as to dealing with this situation right now and getting through it?
I think what students and staff need to recognize is that the world over has never been where we are now. So if you're feeling pressed down because of the pandemic and its uncertainty, you are not alone. There are a lot of us, myself included, who wake up on some day and wish there was someone who could say, the deadline for this pandemic to end is date X and year X or month X. Then I could lighten up a little bit because I know there's an end in sight. This is a journey with too many turns and with too many rough spots. It hasn't been easy for all of us. If you're feeling down, if you're feeling weak, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling fatigued, exhausted, teary, seek help. Seek help. And sometimes the help that you need is being able to speak out and tell the next person, I'm not doing so good. I'm feeling down. We have Mtonjeni, Fountain of Life, here on campus, and you can reach out to them for counseling. We have also counseling for staff, for families, that is enabled by a university. I personally think it's a privilege to have a university that supports us in that kind of way.
Yeah.
And I encourage everyone to take advantage of it. I know that I've taken advantage of it when we've lost staff members. I've felt overwhelmed myself when we've lost students. Because I've never been here before. I've never had to lead an institution with so many people who are under duress because of no fault of their own. So all of us have to dig deep. We have to start thinking differently about our own humanity and our own fallibility. I think we all wake up knowing it could have been me. Nothing makes me so special. And the other person whose demise has arrived less fortunate than me. It could be any one of us. So I think the most brave thing that a student, a staff member, a leader, a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, a cousin can do when they are under duress is to seek help. It's the right thing to do. And we seek help because we really want to get through this. And some days are more difficult for us to get through all by ourselves. And that's okay. It's really okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I think we could. Yeah.